who doesn't weaken to the composite acetates, the yin or the yang, or they go weak to both, or the muscles are weak to begin with. So when a person is weak to begin with on the muscles, that's usually a sign of either dehydration, isn't it, or a complete lack of energy, which usually is associated with low ATP and therefore probably is magnesium deficiency. Okay. Then you've got the possibility, like we had here, of someone who doesn't weaken to one or the other, and that could be a cranial fault or something mechanical. But what we did here is we just gave her the light. So she saw the light. Well, she didn't actually see it because she's got to close her eyes, of course. We gave her the light for 1 minute, just in the clear as such, and then we tested them, and then she weakened to the yang, was it, or one of them, yeah. So then we were able to go ahead. So you can use the light to just sort of switch the mechanism on. The brain has to be brought up to firing, to threshold, as it's called, and if it doesn't do that, then you're not going to get the results with the acetates and things. So it just means the brain isn't firing sufficiently, that's all.
Chris, what happens in the incident that is weak, or the muscles are weak? Did you just give them...
Yeah, I just test them with a vial of ATP, but 9 times out of 10, it's magnesium they're short of. So because magnesium is so important with all the energy pathways, or water.
Then you can't continue the evaluation, you can't do the testing then, can you?
The statement there is you can't really continue to test. You could do, because you're using the weakness to see what strengthens.
Right.
So yes, you can. Yeah, you can do that. The other jinx, which we actually haven't come across, is it depending upon the strong muscle that you're using. When you tap the person in and everything on that meridian goes weak, remember the muscle that you're using might be on the same meridian. So in other words, if you're using a deltoid and it's a lung meridian that shows up, all the lung muscles are going to go weak. So remember that, because when we do most of our treatments lying down, we tend to use rectus femoris a lot because it doesn't fatigue very easily. That's a small intestine muscle. So if they happen to come up with small intestine as one of their meridians, and you tune them in, if you like, you give them the light, they're all going to go weak. All the quads are going to go weak. So you've got to use then a deltoid. And if it's really bad luck and it's a lung and a small intestine, you've lost those. Then you've got to use a gluteus medius or something. Okay, just bear that in mind. And you think, oh, that's funny, that muscle's gone weak, because it's on the same circuit. Okay. So remember, your aim is to try and get all the muscles on that circuit to go weak, and then the remedy that you're going to find makes them all go strong. That's the remedy that you're really looking for, or the remedies. And one thing we came across then is someone asked down there, I've got 2 things on it that show up, and that was who was it? P5P and magnesium, wasn't it, over there? Yeah. And they both strengthened all the muscles. Do they need both? Possibly, yes. If something strengthens all the muscles in 2 or 3 things, then the body does need that, if you like. The person does need that. But thinking a little bit laterally, we need magnesium to actually activate vitamin B6 into the pyridoxal 5-phosphate. So it could be that that's an issue. So start with one remedy, the one that strengthens everything. And then what we found is we just simply get the person to close their eyes, muscle test, open the eyes, muscle test again, and if it goes back into weakness, you know there's something else. Okay? If they stay strong, then that's it, job done. Okay? It's like a reset button, like we had to do with the computer just a bit earlier on. Damn thing messes about and everything, switch it off and reboot it. Okay? And that's what you do really. You're taking out all the 90% of our neurological information comes from the eyes. 90%, of our visual input or input to the brain comes from the eyes. So this is why we shut the eyes at the beginning when we're doing that, because the real you is with your eyes closed. Just when you go to bed and you close your eyes, that's the real you. Okay? I'm looking around here and my thoughts are going, and so are yours at the moment. And there's somebody there I don't like, so at the last seminar, and somebody over there, oh, I've fallen in love with that girl, and so on. My emotions are going all over, and so are yours, okay? But who the hell are you? And what you do is you shut the eyes, and that's you. And patients say, when you do that, they say, I don't like that person. I hate closing my eyes. And You know, we went out for a meal last night, and I think we both sort of woke up fairly early, and it was still sort of, I thought it was light, but of course it was just the light outside the window, and it was another hour before it was getting up time. And I closed my eyes, and my brain was going, and half the time you don't know whether you're actually asleep or not, do you? Because you never know when you fall asleep, you know, because your mind is going, somebody's taking over your mind at that stage, and you're flicking around from this to that, and you're in that sort of limbo state. But somebody's in control, and that's called the subconscious mind. The subconscious has taken over, and you're not aware of it consciously because you've gone to sleep consciously, but you're subconscious, and so you don't know whether it's real or whether it's a dream. Okay? And this happens with people when they get mentally disorders, we might call them, a mental illness, is they don't know what is real and what is not sometimes. Okay, so they live in this twilight sort of zone. There's also things, I think we were probably all right last night, but there are sometimes when you go out, you get a lot of bad dreams. Do you find that? If you go out for a meal, sometimes you get bad dreams if you eat at home. And you know, luckily with kinesiology, you can test that. Is it something you've eaten that made you feel sort of not sleep well, or something you've eaten that's given you nightmares? Because we don't usually get nightmares as adults, or weird dreams. You know, sometimes you get really weird dreams, and sometimes they're horrible dreams, and sometimes they're not so horrible, but they're just strange. And they're usually associated with chemicals, as we'll see, that you've taken in your diet in some way, and they can distort the thoughts process. Now, if that does it when you're asleep, it can also do it when you're awake. Because our subconscious is ruling 99% of the time, we're actually working subconsciously. You're listening to me for a brief moment, but it doesn't take 2 ticks for you to be thinking about what you're going to be doing tonight, where you're going for your holiday, and that's your subconscious. And your subconscious is your memory. It's all the information we've ever taken in that huge database. And a patient during the week said, she said, I think we're in our 70s now, and my husband, we're not so good with the brains, we seem to be forgetting things. She said, I think the answer is the brain's full. And we've had 70 years of experience of learning, and now it's full, and it can't take anymore. Well, other people like Glenn Doman say, well, we actually use only 10% in a lifetime of our memory of our brain capacity. Maybe more, maybe less, but I don't think that was a good excuse, isn't it? So we're never going to let that happen, because we're going to continue to come on seminars and to teach here, and we just make the biochemistry harder and harder each time, so you actually learn a little bit more each time. What was it you said? If you come away, or a practitioner told you, he came away with learning one thing at a seminar, he said it's worthwhile, as long as it's something new, and ideally to do with the topic. Okay, so this was something in the Week magazine. When we took up David, or started doing David Hawkins's work 10, 12 years ago, maybe more, David talks about the level of consciousness or truth, and it's quite interesting to use his tests on books and newspapers and television news programs and things. And you'll find it quite horrific, really, the level of consciousness or level of truth. The only journal, the only newsagent, was the Week that actually calibrated to having some element of truth in it. Okay, all the other newspapers were well below 200 out of 1,000. Okay, some were very low. I won't mention any names. But this one, I take this every week, and it takes the best articles from the newspapers during the week. And it's non-political, so you don't get the big bias of one political party or another. So it said on here, age, it seems, is not just a number. Researchers at the University of Southern California looked at the DNA of 4,000 people over the age of 57 and found striking differences between chronological and biological age. Some so-called super-agers grow old very slowly. One 59-year-old was physically just 23, while at the other end of the scale, a 66-year-old was found to have the biological age of 114. We all know people like this, don't we, who age and they're old long before their time. Not us, of course. The scientists studied the participants' epigenetic clocks. What have you just been doing? You've been running the epigenetic clock and changing it. Analysing epigenetic changes, whereby genes start to behave differently through the basic DNA sequence, although the basic DNA sequence remains the same. So epigenetics is the art or the way of affecting gene expression without actually altering the genes themselves. In other words, it's allowing genes to turn on and turn off. Such changes are a key factor in aging. Interim findings suggest that environmental and social factors, like Gill's been talking about, such as stress and pollution, accelerate aging. Obesity accelerates aging by 18 months, and suffering psychological distress, which we're going to be talking about now, by at least 4 months. Being female slows down the clock by up to 2 years.
Oh, well, there you go.
So, sex change for all the males. You want to live longer. Okay. Now, something else which is in this week's. A man from Hampshire claims to have found an unlikely cure for his mental health struggles. I drank my fresh morning urine, and dark clouds of deep depression were lifted from me, says Harry Matadine, 32. Soon he found that even better tonic was urine which has been aged for up to 4 days. I felt an instant uplift in my energy. I grew to love it. Now he says he drinks 200 ml of urine a day and even moisturises his face with it. Well, urea has been known as a moisturiser, and it's in most moisturising creams, in fact. You'll see sodium urea. It plumps the skin up, you see. That's what it does. And it's also a very good cure for athlete's foot. It's an old remedy in the army that what you do is, you've got athlete's foot because you wear the boots all the time, is you wee on your athlete's foot and it gets rid of it. And I was teaching this in Russia some years ago, and this doctor said, "Question, Chris." So I said, "What is it?" He said, "Do you take your boots off?" Or keep them on. So anyway, good fun. So I thought I could share those two things with you. So let's look at problems which are a little bit further down the road. Psychiatric problems are really just extended functional problems. So we can have a functional problem because we get anxious a little bit at the time. We might get anxious on a Monday. Some of these I've just sort of put a few extra pictures in that you might not find you got. So some people get anxious on Sunday night or Monday morning because they don't really want to go to work. And then they go to work and then they're actually okay for the rest of the week. And it's not unnormal to have a bit of anxiety. And if something has actually happened to you, in the way of a trauma that you experience, and you think, well, that's really upset me in some way, it's upset you, and then you get over it, don't you? All your hormones rebalance and things. But if you're suffering from anxiety in the background, that program that's playing is more continuous, you then start getting changes in your chemistry, and that itself maintains the very problem. And then you can't switch off. It could be that the depression comes, this black cloud comes, and then it won't go away. Okay, and that will be down this end. And so that becomes technically a psychiatric problem, because a psychiatric problem will be something which is harder to shift back into normality and tends to maintain itself 24/7. But to feel the blues, like Steve was saying to you, do you feel the blues? And he said, well, not really the blues, but I find difficulty motivating myself in the winter. Is that right? You don't mind me saying that? Okay. And I think most of us feel a little bit like that, don't we? But we all have times when we feel the blues, and we all have times when we lack motivation. I call them motivation lacking days. Now, hopefully they don't go into days, but you just have a day sometimes when you really don't feel like doing anything. But that doesn't mean you're psychiatrically ill, okay? But if these tendencies become more common in our life, then you think, maybe I should be doing something about it, because maybe I am feeling the blues. People keep, my wife or my husband, getting quite upset with me, and people at work and so on. Miserable old devil, or whatever they call you. So it may be that you do need to do something about it, but who do you go to? Do you go to a doctor? If you go to the doctor and you tell them you're suffering from depression, you'll get stuck on antidepressants. And you're on those basically for life, whether they work or they don't. And as you said about with tranquilizers like Valium, benzodiazepines, they're very difficult to come off. They tell you, first of all, they're not addictive, or you take these for a month, and then your body adapts to it, or what it does, by blocking the breakdown of serotonin, etc. And then you come off it, and you've got no serotonin. And you remember about 5 years ago, maybe more now, they had a whole range of suicides in South Wales with young people, do you remember? And that was after an antidepressant. So the various doctors in there were prescribing this to young people, and they should never give antidepressants to a young person. They should find out what the problem is with them. And of course, when they came off the antidepressants, they haven't got any serotonin. And low serotonin does lead to suicide. And it was terrible. Once they discovered that, of course, those drugs were removed. Okay, so the foundation of looking at an alternative approach to psychiatric problems, which, as I say, we all have psychiatric problems, it's just a matter of the degree and how far they are. So don't get put off by the word there. But looking at it from a boosting the molecular normal, also means normal chemistry within the body, was started back in the late 50s, early 60s. And it's a really interesting story. So before we do that, let's have a quick definition about terms. So insanity is a word which we don't really use anymore, but it's a disease of perception combined with an inability to tell whether these changes are real or not. So this would be like living in a twilight zone, but being conscious that you're getting thoughts which are not really real. And that was the definition in 1850. So understanding the different numerous neurotransmitters and their receptors has led to the design of a whole range of different drugs and medications, which have been fantastic for a lot of people. But it's not the answer. You know, it may see them through crises and things, but it's not the answer. The answer is to try and get to the cause of where this imbalance is in their brain chemicals. So depression, as Gill said, is that feeling of being low. This would be our local MP, really, isn't she? She's just down the road there. And anxiety would be wondering about the problems ahead with the virus and Brexit, etc. So you can see clearly in the face, you know, there's a depressive sort of state. If you notice with Mrs. May, when she became Prime Minister, she was quite cocky and everything else. But by the time she left, do you remember she was like this? You know, look at that kyphosis in the back with her. And you wanted to say, stand up straight, woman. And of course, those muscles on the back, the erector spinae muscles, belong to which meridian? The bladder meridian, that's right. And what is the emotion associated with the bladder? Is what is the unspeakable that Gill said, shame and humiliation. And that's how she felt. And she was getting lower and lower. And every time there was a defeat in the House of Commons, she got lower. So, you can recognise emotional problems in the physical structure. In other words, the anatomy of the body has a change. And this is through the muscles, isn't it? The muscles we recognise are really the result of changes in the meridians or the energy fields. And if we can measure those, you can then measure the change in the muscles, which then reflect in the change in the posture. So depression is a state of low mood and aversion to activity that can affect a person's thoughts, behaviours, feelings and sense of well-being. Anxiety, on the other hand, is a feeling of worry, nervousness, unease about something with an uncertain cause or outcome. And as Gill said, depression is low levels are reflected or manifested through and expressed through low levels of brain chemicals, and anxiety is a high level. Okay, so that's, you know, was yin and yang. So yang is the low, and the yin is the high. So it's the high levels. So what we find, of course, is we're a combination of both. If you remember with Steve, he had the bladder, which is low serotonin on one side, and the spleen, which is high histamine on the other. So there's a certain amount of arousal, but it's being balanced by that lack of motivation and problems on the other side. So what we've got to do is not lift him up from there or not bring him down from there, but we've got to do that, haven't we? Okay? And that's what we found with zinc. Manic depression, or bipolar disorder as it's now better known, is a mental disorder characterized by periods of elevated mood and periods of depression. Usually the periods of depression are much longer than the periods of elevation. So the manic is going crazy, working 23 hours a day, etc., and being as high as a kite, and then boom, collapsing into depression, which can last for weeks or even months. Schizophrenia is a mental disorder often characterized by abnormal social behavior, which is hard to pick up, first of all, when you see somebody. There's something about them, they don't sort of behave in quite the normal way. And a failure to recognize what is real. God, We all get that sometimes, don't we? If you're actually truthful to yourself, you could swear black is white sometimes, and then somebody tells you something else, and then you think, oh. I can remember once I witnessed a car accident with my wife, and the police came round a couple of days later to take an interview from me, and my wife was out. And then they came out and said, would you mind if we do an interview with your wife? And I said, no, come round tomorrow, whatever. And they did. Then the policeman came round on the third time. He said, it's interesting. He said, you told different stories and you both had to watch the accident. And I said, oh, she's got it wrong. And then I read, and he read that one, and I said, well, actually she might have been right. But I'd interpreted it in the way I wanted to see it. So it's perception, isn't it? And the perception is not always real. We think it is, but what we see and what we hear may not always be how we interpret it, may not actually be the truth, completely, or fact. So schizophrenia, we've all got a touch of it. It's just that some people have it more, and they may manifest it in all the time in their life, or they just may manifest it at particular times of stress, as we'll see, and it comes out more when we're under stress. Psychosis is a severe mental disorder in which the thought and emotions are so impaired that contact with reality, contact is lost with external reality. So this is something where we no longer belong to the current level of consciousness. We've gone into our own world, and we may be frightened that people are after us in every way. Paranoid schizophrenic is the most common subtype of schizophrenia, in which the patient has delusions that a person or individuals are plotting against them or members of their family. So this is further down the track. But again, you hear this so often. So-and-so's, within the family has created a problem. They haven't created a problem. The person's created the problem, but they see it as if somebody's after them. Particularly elderly people, they're after my money. They want me to change the will and all that sort of stuff, So there's a little bit of paranoid schizophrenic in all of us, but sometimes it's manifest much more commonly with some people than others, and it's usually when they're under stress, and we all get under stress from time to time. So history, before we break here for lunch, of mental illness, or let's not call it necessarily mental, but the illness which is more persistent than transient. Back in biblical times, this was called possession, wasn't it? And our Lord managed to release people from the possession of the devil or evil spirits and things. And then basically that sort of remained the same through many hundreds of years. Then in the 1800s, these people were locked up basically in lunatic asylums, as they were called. And sometimes terrible, they were incarcerated. The conditions were appalling. And when they were put into that, they were there for life and never came out, because nobody did anything to actually help them in any way, because nobody knew how to help them. Then in the late 1800s, early 1900s, Freud and his schools came in with psychoanalysis and started trying to reason that there was a cause for madness or insanity, and that the answer was always your relationship with your mother. Okay? So the mother got the blame for all problems. But you could go through years and years of psychoanalysis, and maybe sometimes in that time the person got better, and maybe they didn't. 1938 was the first case of electric convulsive therapy, when they put the shocks onto the head there, and then the person goes into an awful state. The shock is actually only applied for fractions of a second, because it's so destructive. But if it works, it destroys a lot of the memory. So the person no longer remembers the cause of their problem, but their memory also goes for other things as well in the process. It's used still today. Usually now, thank heaven, it's used under anaesthetic rather than without an anaesthetic, as it was done in those days, for really chronic problems which just don't seem to resolve for anything else. Then in the 1940s, they discovered that just exercise and getting the thyroid medication right. A lot of these people were just suffering from thyroid problems, underactive thyroids. And if you got them out for exercise and cold showers, it made an amazing difference to them. The people felt much better and brighter. So that was interesting. But in 1949, they performed the first lobotomy, which was removing half of the cortex, to amazingly good effects with some people, but not to others. Then in the 1950s, the early psychiatric medicines came in, And these would be for psychoses, such as the thorazine was the first one, and largactil. These were medications a lot in the 1950s, early 60s, and they were for psychotic type of patients. So now we're getting medicines coming in. And the interesting story with that is they didn't know how they worked. They had no idea about brain chemicals. They did all these experiments on animals. And they noticed that this animal got a bit excited after they had this medication or this drug for some other reason. And the other one went to sleep. So they, if an animal goes to sleep, we'll count that as a tranquilizer. But they had no idea. It was purely experimental, even Valium. They had no idea how it worked. They had no idea of GABA receptors in those days. 1960s, psychologists came in and counselling. Okay, this is abbreviating it a lot. So people then tried to work out the reasons for problems, and there were all sorts of offshoots of these. And people went into counselling for years. But by the 1990s, the psychoanalysis side, all the deans of the different faculties in psychiatry were out. If they were psychoanalysts, they were all got rid of, and the pharmaceuticals moved in. So everyone now is a pharmaceutical who heads psychiatric hospitals. They're not psychoanalysts anymore. So by the 2000s, the pharmaceutical industry had taken over. Okay? So it has the monopoly, if you like, on it. And anybody else who tries to get in there is usually, trounced upon very carefully, as we'll see, with the story of orthomolecular. So this is probably a good time to break. Actually, I'll just do this. Antidepressants, we know, treat disorders, anxieties, etc. Stimulants are used to boost people back up. Antipsychotics are used to treat psychotic symptoms, such as the largactil, etc. Mood stabilizers are used to treat bipolar disorders, so they would be when people got high and low brain chemicals. Anxiolytics are obviously the ones, tranquilizers, and depressants and antidepressants are used as hypnotics. So what we'll do is we'll break now, and we'll come back for lunch, and then I'm going to show you something you certainly will never come across, I don't think, before, and give you a totally different way of looking at emotional and mental illness. Okay?